Alrighty guys, here we are. Welcome back. This is the video tutorial for the overlay version 2.0. Before I dive into things, I just want to cover a few tiny details that I forgot in the previous video, the announcement video. If you haven't watched that, I recommend you watch it because there's some promo and announcement stuff in there that I would like you to hear, and you'll probably like to hear that there's some free stuff for you to pick up, so go check that out. But yeah, a couple of things that I forgot to mention in that segment was that well, this video will in fact pretty much replace the tutorial video of version 1.0 because the differences are so important that I just kind of want to go over the whole thing back start to finish. And yeah, basically, if you're familiar with version 1.0, some of the things are going to be like things you probably already heard before, because I'm going to have to repeat a few things. But yeah, I'll try to keep this video more concise. I'll give less examples as I did previously, just to kind of try to keep the video a bit shorter duration. And since I now started a Discord server, I highly recommend you joining that if you have more questions. If this video doesn't cover something that puzzles you or whatever, then please join the Discord, and then I can help you there and answer all the questions that you could possibly have at the end. And yeah, and the idea is that later on, as I flesh it out, there will be all the nuances about stuff that I won't actually cover in this video. I will hopefully be able to write it out in Discord, and just so you guys have it there. Yeah, the way to access my Discord, the only way right now to do that is by going to the link that was in the previous video that gets you to the Sacred Geometry version 1.0, which is now free for everybody, so you can pick it up by adding it to your favorites and then adding it to the chart. But at the bottom of the description, there's one Discord link there that you can join. And yeah, it's free for everybody, so you just can pop in. The reason I only want this link here and I'm not going to share it in the YouTube itself is hopefully avoid some of the bot spam, because I'm just kind of afraid that I'm going to get avalanched if I start sharing this everywhere. Yeah, so to try and avoid that, this is the only place where you can get it. Alright, so today we'll be talking about this one here, which is the beta preview version, which will be free for everybody to pick up as of this video going live. I will leave a link in the description. Let me also do like I did previously, copy this and actually apply it to a text field. Boom, there we go, and put it up here just in case for whatever reason I forget or it doesn't work. In theory, if you put this into your browser, then you should arrive here. Right, same thing, add it to your favorites and off you go. Yeah, just make sure that you have version 2.0.1, even though here at the top it says 2.0. This was an update that I pushed this morning, 8 hours ago. Just tiny bug fixes and stuff, but just make sure that when you load it up, it actually says 2.0.1. Yeah, and then one final note that I also forgot to mention is I plan to do at least one live stream during the month of February, just a chill out live stream, which I will do on Twitch most likely. Just to kind of have a long form Q&A session for all you guys that pick it up and play around with it, and just have a chill evening, morning, whatever, wherever you happen to be, and just kind of hang out and stuff. I will probably start organizing that in Roman's server. By the way, Roman, if you're listening, I would love, for maybe us together do the stream, like go stream together and just kind of geek out over it and, tell me what you think about it. I would just love to, have like an hour or so and just kind of chill and hang out and talk about it. So yeah, let me know, hit me up, hit me DM or something, and we'll figure that out. And then yeah, we'll announce it in Roman's server if it's gonna happen, and otherwise in my own server I will also announce it like when I'm gonna be doing that, so you guys can tune in. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So yeah, if you need this, pause the video and then type this manually into your browser, and yeah, you should be good to go. All right. Yeah, and by the way, I definitely recommend doing that while you're watching the video, because what that basically allows you to do is to just, you know, put me in with this video on the second screen or something, and then load it up on your chart, and you can actually follow along as I explain things, and do it on your own charts, basically, so you can kind of live copycat me, if you will. I think that's going to be a cool learning experience. So yeah, I guess we can dive into it. Yeah, so I'm gonna do things slightly differently. Hopefully it will be an improvement over the previous video. And yeah, just to round it off, month of February, it's gonna be free the entire month. And then after, at the 1st of March, it's Overlay 2.0 official release will be out, but that one will be behind the paywall. But I hope that by that time you guys have had enough time to kind of, you know, figure out if it's something that suits you or not. Yeah, and like I said, please join the Discord if you have any questions, and I will be very happy to help you there. All right, so let's load it up. So if you have it favored, it should appear in your list. If it doesn't, restart TradingView app, because usually it just kind of like needs a restart, and then it will refresh this list and it will be there. If you have paid access to it after February, then it's gonna obviously appear in your invite-only scripts down here, right? But since I'm the one that built it, then here we go. Overlay 2.0 beta. There we go. See? So we loaded up version 2.0.1. That's what you want to see. By the way, if you have seen the previous tutorial, version 1, you actually should be noticing by now how incredibly fast this thing loads, right? It was like pretty much instant. Well, I remember on the other video, it took like, I don't know, half a minute to load or something ridiculous. Anyway, let's see if I'm not forgetting anything. I don't think so. Right, so first thing I kind of want to do that I didn't do in the previous video is the following. Turn off the background, put this on dark. There we go. 24 should be big enough for you guys to see, I hope. So kind of what I want to do is just kind of answer two basic questions, right? Because what does the overlay do? Question number 1. And then question number 2 is, who is it for, right? So what does it do and who should be interested in this, right? That's kind of like the things I kind of want to cover. All right, we'll leave this over here. So what does the overlay do? The overlay, basically what it's meant to do is it's meant to detect highs and lows and then identify market structure based on all those highs and lows, right? And draw all those lines related to that automatically and update it automatically as the chart progresses. And what's the purpose of that? Because in theory, you could do all those things manually, right? And that's kind of where the idea started from, is that initially when I started out, I did everything manually. And then at some point I was just kind of, can I maybe automate this and this? Oh, can I automate this? And so on, and just kept growing and growing and growing until I just kind of came to a point where I was like, oh my God, this is pretty much drawing almost everything that I would possibly want on the chart, right? So the main idea is that it will help you in the sense of not having to draw so many things manually. Now, on the higher time frames, that might not be such a big of a deal, because on a daily time frame, for example, well, you draw like a couple of levels and you pretty much are good to go, right? You don't really need that much. But if you're traveling down the time frames and go lower and lower and lower, the lower you go, the faster it updates, the faster you have to constantly be moving your lines or whatever that you're using. And yeah, it can get quite tedious and overbearing and just a chore, a lot of work to keep up, right? And this thing can just simplify a lot of that if you get used to using it, basically. Because obviously it's sort of my interpretation of how I do things. But what I think is the beauty of this is that it removes any sort of subjective placement that you could possibly do when drawing a support and resistance or a line or whatever it happens to be, right? If you, let's say, you want to draw in this low, well, let me just actually change this to a bit. There we go. You can see it a bit better. Right, so yeah, do you pick this line? Like, do you pick the candle that has the most volume? You know, whatever your rules happen to be. Do you use the wicks instead of the bodies? You know, there's quite a little bit of option as to like how you want to do things. Now, I personally myself am more of a candle close type of guy, mainly because I also tend to switch between candle and line chart, and on line chart it just looks much nicer if you have candle bodies. So that's a thing. Yeah, and as you go down, like I said, as you go down the time frames, you know, every time chart updates, then you have to move your lines and stuff. And yeah, you can organize it in folders and make everything like nicely organized, but it's still a lot of work to, you know, maintain all that kind of stuff. So who is this for? Question number 2. So basically what this overlay does is it creates a lot of horizontal support and resistance, but mainly what it does is it creates horizontal ranges. Let me also change this to the same color. There we go. Right, so horizontal ranges like this, right? So if you're somebody who enjoys horizontal ranges, you're probably gonna like this thing. And like I was trying to say before, the beauty of it is that the overlay does this completely automatically. And what it means is that it has a set of rules that will detect highs and lows. And if certain conditions are not met, it will just not draw that high or low. And it removes all sort of subjective kind of process that might potentially be going on in your own personal bias of being bullish or bearish or whatever it happens to be. And you can, by using this, completely eliminate that factor altogether, right? Because the overlay itself provides enough levels and things for you to make objective trading decisions based on the things that it offers. Obviously, it's I would recommend combining it with other stuff that you use, like either Roman's profit indicator and golden pepes and, you know, reversal zones and whatever else you want to use. I'm not saying that this is, you know, the ultimate thing. Obviously, the more confluence, the better. But from a technical analysis, drawing perspective, I personally am so used to it now because I've been working on it so long and I've been, you know, watching it so long that I just almost don't draw anything manually anymore unless I'm, you know, doing something specific. So that's kind of like the main thing I would say. And yeah, who is it for? For people that like horizontal supports, resistance, horizontal ranges, one-to-one targets, and yeah, all that kind of stuff, right? What is my interpretation of range dynamics? Oh, basically you have an impulse. It sets a range high, creates a retrace, sets a range low, which then gives you your horizontal range. This is, you know, pretty standard stuff that Roman also teaches much better than I ever could. And then basically the dynamic that emerges is that you start bouncing in between the ranges until eventually one breaks, right? And that can either be a full-on break and then continuation, or it can be some sort of, you know, distribution thing and then return back into the range, which then leads to ending up at the other side of the range, right? So kind of just the basic standard horizontal range stuff that Roman teaches. This is basically designed to do that automatically for you. Now, obviously, nothing is perfect, right? I can only make it as good as the code allows me to make it. Maybe in the future I'll figure out new ways to make it even better, but in my opinion, and from the opinion that the people that have kindly enough supported me and actually got access and are testing it, they are loving it. So I'm getting good feedback, which means is a good sign. But yeah, nothing is perfect. So, you know, keep in mind that my interpretation might be slightly different than yours and so on, right? And in terms of market structure, it's nothing fancy, just kind of like the standard thing that Trader Main or, you know, all those guys or the, you Now the other trade is the trade market structure. If you have your typical downtrend, right, then you have a lower high here, right? So if that lower high gets broken, then you tend to create a higher low, and then price continues up, right? This is the market structure break, and then you kind of look for your entry here, at your stop here, and you chase the move up, and then for the bearish scenario, vice versa, right? So this is just the standard market structure kind of thing. I'm not doing any sort of fancy, complicated, convoluted counts and all that kind of jazz. It's just basic market structure, nothing too serious. So if you're somebody that likes to trade that type of stuff, you're probably gonna really like this thing, right? So just that's kind of the idea behind what the overlay does and who it is for. Now, if we take a look at the settings, quite a few things have changed since version 1, which most of the changes I've generally covered them in the previous video. If you haven't watched it, go watch that, because it just, if you're familiar with version 1, then it's going to look very different and you're potentially going to be a little bit lost. So watch that first and then come back here. In that video, you couldn't see the alerts, but here you can. These are not activated in the beta version. They are disabled because they're not actually functional yet, because I'm still in the process of finishing, but they should be done by the end of February. So just keep that in mind that this doesn't work, right? So you can basically ignore all this. Right, so functionality-wise, it is still the same as version 1. Like nothing has changed in the sense that it now, operates completely differently. It doesn't. It's still the same thing. It's just the way it goes about it under the hood is different, and it allows me to do, cool fancy stuff with it, like multi-TimeFrame, which I'll be showing off in a little bit. But yeah, so I'm gonna be jumping around a little bit because, well, I'll just explain why, right? So we have the SD blocks from version 1 is just this. It's now called SD Tech because it now not only does blocks, it does other stuff as well. We have the rangefinder, which was previously known as the automated range. It's just a little bit shorter, a bit catchier name, and it fits nicely here. So that's why the name change. And then we have market structure, which are your breaks and your structure. There's a new option, zones, which we'll look at. And there's some cool fancy SFP deviation tech in there that I think you guys are really gonna like. But yeah, let me just kind of type this out so it makes it a little bit easier to understand once I start jumping back and forth between the options, and you kind of know why I'm jumping around and why that kind of makes sense, right? So let me just drag this in a little bit, this to the side. So the way you can think about it is as if you're looking at a building, right? And with a building, you have the foundation, right? Which are your SD blocks, basically, right? That's where it all starts. These are the first things that the overlay starts doing when it's like starts calculating ranges. It actually starts here, right? It doesn't start up here. Right? So it starts with the SD blocks. Those are your foundation. These SD blocks, they confirm relatively fast, right, in 2 bars. Right? So when the conditions are met, it waits for 2 bars for confirmation that it's actually still valid, and then it locks it in, right? Then what you get is basically the rebar, if you will, right? It's spelled like this? I think so. Anyway, you get the point. Right, the rebar is kind of like the internal structure, which is your market structure, right? And that just takes these SD blocks, all these highs and lows it detects, and then figures out, increases like some of the conditions that need to be met, but then figures out which ones are higher highs, lower lows, lower highs, and higher lows, right? And then after that, you get what would be the shell of the building, if you will, right? The outer layer, which gets constructed around the structure of the rebars and the concrete and all that stuff. And that's basically your rangefinder, right? Your rangefinder then takes only the higher highs and the lower lows and creates ranges, horizontal ranges like the one you're seeing now, based on this, right? So it starts here with SD blocks, then it figures out this, And then the rangefinder uses this to create the ranges. And then lastly, you basically have your, you know, cell tower antennas, if you will, on the roof of the building, which are your SFPs and other signals like the trend zones and all that kind of stuff. That's just, once this is all in place, then it detects various different types of signals, right? So that's kind of like how you should think about how this thing constructs itself as it goes. I hope that makes sense. Let me take a sip of water. If you guys can hear weird noises in the background, that's because my neighbor decided that it's a good time for drilling a bunch of holes in the wall. Sorry about that if the mic picks it up, but we'll see. All right, so let's dive into it then. Let's delete this. Zoom in a little bit. So, like I said, we're going to start with the SD. Let me first cover the colors. It works a little bit differently than version 1. I already mentioned it in the previous video, but basically you have two color themes, row 1 and row 2. If we read the info at the side, you can read it here. Overlay color settings, left to right, color 1 is bearish, 2 is bullish, 3 is golden ratios, 4 is the accent color, 5 is the rangefinder, and 6 are SD block tech stuff. Right? And then row 1 is the light mode, row 2 is the dark mode, and then next to the dark mode you have a little toggle which flips between the two. If it's off, it uses the top one. If it's on, then it uses the bottom one. All right. Much more simpler than version 1, and you still have the same kind of functionality in terms of like having two themes to switch between light and dark, which is something that I do quite often, given that I work like late into the night, and then I prefer dark mode so I don't fucking burn my retinas. But yeah, during the daytime, I'm actually much more of a fan of the white light mode, because it's just the stark contrast just makes it clearer to me somehow. I just enjoy it more. Anyway, yeah, so let's go and apply SD Tech and see what happens. All right, so let me also increase the one thing. I think it's mentioned here. Yes, note. Most overlay elements now have hard-coded opacity levels. So that means that this slider for many elements doesn't work anymore, right? Because, for example, these SD blocks are hard-coded at 5% opacity, right? If you want lighter color, more transparent or more dark, just choose a lighter shade of whatever color you're using. Let's say you're using purple and it's like too intense, right? Then you can just kind of lower it with using a lower kind of purple, right? So that's how that works. Yeah, so SD Tech, and like I said, it detects all these blocks based on a confirmation period of 2, right? SD, if you remember from previous video, it stands for supply and demand. And the basic gist is whenever it detects a high, we consider that a point of supply. Whenever we detect a low somewhere, then it's a point of demand, right? Buyers step in here, which creates the bottom, and sellers are stepping in here that forces price to go down, right? So there's supply here that people sell, and so on, right? It'd be pretty straightforward. And then the only thing that we need to kind of note about this is that, let's see, let me pinpoint two that are opposite. Yes, let's see. I think this works, right? If we go to line chart and we do this, take this, actually, it's probably gonna work a bit better. Right, so if we take this high and this low, what you can see is that in this case, the bar that sets the high is bigger than the bar that locks it in afterwards, right? And the block is this tiny piece here, which just extends it, right? But in this case, it's actually the low that's smaller and not the candle that comes afterwards, right? But now this time it takes, again, the smaller candle and then creates the block from there, right? That's just a tiny detail. It's not a bug that's intended, right? It always will select the smallest of the two candles, right? This one is bigger and this one is smaller. That's why the block is here, not down here, right? Bigger, smaller block, right? Right. So that's, I already explained that in the previous video, but I just wanted to cover it again. Right. So what you can do with this is there's a few options here. You can have them off. So when you're using other stuff, which we'll cover later, you can actually turn the blocks off if they're in your way and you don't want them. You can have them block mode, which is just 1x means one distance, and the distance is the tick rate, which I'll cover in a sec when we get to the rangefinder, because it's going to be easier to explain all these options once the rangefinder is on. And you can just extend them by multiplying their length, right? So if you want blocks to be a bit longer, then you can say, for example, let's multiply them by 4, and you will see that they all extend and they start to overlap, right? So now we have an overlapping region here. Let me take a boxy between this point and this point, and you can see that's exactly where kind of like the rejection on this area comes in, right? So the more you extend these, the more they're going to overlap and create interesting kind of confluent levels based just purely on all the supply and demand high lows that the overlay finds. And then you have one last option, which is the heat map, which is basically extends them all into infinity, right? Now on the lower time frames, this can get quite intense. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, just this thing alone will already give you like a bunch of levels of interest, as long as you're in an area where there's already been previous price action. Obviously, if you're in like all-time high mode, then there's not going to be anything to the left for you to kind of find. But yeah, you can see how this kind of already is detecting quite some interesting levels. Bitcoin is experiencing some pain at the moment. Right, so that's the SD blocks, basically. We'll put them back at 1. Just to kind of keep it simple. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move to the market structure and we're going to add the highs and lows. And what this will do is, as you'll see, it now identifies, based on market structure definition in the way I described it before, which of them are higher highs, lower lows, lower highs, and so on, right? And you'll note that the higher highs and the lower lows have a little bit of a thicker line, right, to distinguish them from the other ones. And then there's also going to be obviously just SD blocks in the middle somewhere that are neither of any sort of high or low, because the conditions on those specific points do not meet the requirements. Right, and then let's see if we then activate the rangefinder, you will start to see what's happening, right? Like I said before, remember the analysis of the building that I made? The rangefinder takes all the highs and lows, higher highs and lower lows, excuse me, and then draws ranges based on them, right? And that's where the horizontal ranges come from. Right? A new tiny addition is this diagonal line that you see here. This basically just indicates where the last range is being drawn from. Just kind of like a tiny helpful little quality of life improvement. Right there, right? And as you also notice is that now, this wasn't the thing, SD blocks are now integrated into the rangefinder, and here you can see that the lower high is still a length of 1, but the lower low is now not only colored in, it's also extended all the way down the entire range, which gives a nice sort of level of interaction when these kind of things happen, right? You can see that it doesn't quite reach the range high, but the wicks still interact with the SD block of that particular higher high, right? And what I said about it being a little bit nuanced in the sense that I cannot make it perfect is that you wouldn't necessarily consider this a higher high compared to this, but that's because it detects a lower high here, right? This higher high is only a higher high because there is a previous found lower high here, right? But if you were to do this manually, you might actually just completely ignore this as a higher high. You might just, yeah, it's a higher high than this, but since I'm looking at the bigger structure, this is not a higher high because it's not higher than this, right? So keep that in mind, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And you'll see later on why. And it mainly comes to what I said about subjective stuff. This is a system, it will always draw it the same way, and you can count on it always being the same whenever the conditions are met, right? And that's important when you're trying to figure out the trading strategy, that you constantly have consistent parameters, right? So hopefully that's clear. If you're familiar with version 1, then this shouldn't be all too alien. You pretty much already have a decent idea of how this works. Now, there's a new option here in terms of visual display. So we'll just kind of go into the information tab here, info tooltip thing. Rangefinder settings, the setting 1 selects rangefinder RF, visual mode. Setting number 2 selects the manual range. We'll cover that a little bit later. But I'll keep on reading. Note, rangefinder settings do not affect market structure settings or alerts. So anything you do here on how to display the rangefinder will not affect any of the signals or any of the alerts, right? It's just a matter of visually displaying stuff, nothing else. Another note, when selecting a manual range, always introduce the highest number of the 2 points. We'll cover that in a little bit. And note, make sure to set desired drawback limit before selecting a manual range, as it affects the range number, the rangefinder numerical count, right? The drawback limit is here. It's this setting, which says by default says 500. And I can kind of start to show like what these options here do. We'll leave the multi-time frame for a little bit later, but we're going to focus on this row now to kind of explain what they do. And just keep in mind that the settings that are here at the top will pretty much always affect everything down below, right? So these are important to set at the beginning and make sure that they're, you know, set to whatever you want to achieve with the overlay. So tick rates, 12 or 6. Setting 1, set overlay tick rate, 12 or 6. Setting 2, set visible time frames. And setting 3, set drawback limit anywhere between 100 and 5,000. Note, when multi-time frame is active, drawback limit has a hidden multiplier to automatically compensate for the longer bar distances. And I will cover that again once we dive into multi-time frame mode. So what does this do? Now, if we zoom out, you'll actually see a line here, a vertical line that says 500 bars. That is the limit which you can manually set from which point onwards the overlay starts drawing stuff, right? It's to save resources, have it load much faster, because if we're trading up here, then all this information down here, you don't really need it until you get down there, right? So why would you draw all the way back to, you know, whatever? And you can just adjust it. If you take the arrows, it will adjust by 100 at a time, right? So if we say 600, you'll see this line move to the left. There we go. And if we just increase it more, then it will just keep, you know, going backwards, and there we go, right? So you can manually set. If you said like, hey, I'm just interested in this area here, then you can probably set it to like, I don't know, 400 or 500, something like that. Maybe 300 even. Let's see. Yeah, pretty much, right? The only thing you have to make sure is that there is at least one higher high and one lower low, right? Because that's kind of important for it to establish the first range from which it calculates all the other ones, right? So just make sure that you have at least one of each before the point of where you're actually like interested in having it show stuff, right? But yeah, for the most part, you know, anywhere between 5 and 5,000, which is the maximum, should be more than enough, you know, for you to cover everything. And this kind of basically substitutes the old backtest mode that was in version 1, right? You can now manually decide where you want the range to be. So tick rate, it's still the same as version 1. If you're familiar with it, then you already kind of know how it works. But basically, it affects various... man, this guy with the drill just doesn't stop. It affects not just this, it affects a bunch of other stuff, but the way you can think about it is the most important aspect that it affects is the confirmation period for the market structure, and thus the confirmation period for the rangefinder. And you can see that by these tiny little markers that the range has here on the highs and on the lows, right? There's tiny little cross thingies happening, and that's also the point where it marks the diagonal line from where it's pulling the range from, right? These little things, these are the markers. If you were to do this, then you see that they are placed at the 13th bar. This is a tiny change from version 1. Version 1, they used to appear at the 12th, but now they appeared at the 13th, which means that if you use the replay tool, you cut it off exactly where that little marker is instead of before, right? You cut it off there and it will display the range up until that point, basically, and show you what the range looked like at that point in time. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. All right. That was the tick rate, right? Yeah, so the tick rate used to have a bunch of different options. So a lot different options higher than 12. Those are no longer needed because this is now, it was like a scuffed version of trying to simulate higher time frame on lower time frame. Not needed anymore because now it's like 100% accurate multi-time frame. If you say you want to see the 4 hour, it's going to show you the 4 hour to the candle, basically. Right, so that's not longer needed anymore. The only thing that's left is the lower version. So this is 12, the basic is 12, and then you have 6, which is fast tick. If you change it, you'll see that the range changes a little bit. See, it's now more noisy, if you will, right? It creates a whole bunch of different ranges and stuff. And yeah, it looks a bit more chaotic. And it's basically a compromise between this, right? Do you want faster confirmation, which also equals more noise? Or do you prefer, like in my case, slower confirmation, which equals more accuracy, right? You cannot have it both ways. You either have one or the other, and you kind of have to find a balance somewhere in between that kind of satisfies you, right? So since the higher stuff is no longer needed, that's multi-time frame mode now. You can either choose between 12 or 6, whichever you prefer. Personally, I would just recommend most people leave it at 12. I might actually in the future just remove option 6 altogether, but for now I will leave it there in case some of you, want to try it out, see how it feels, and if some of you really like it or whatever, then I'll just leave it in. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. And then the middle option, which is the display, right? Also another thing that I forgot to mention, but what I try to do is not have the default setting in these options are no longer stuff like default or on or off or, stuff like that doesn't actually tell you what it's about. Now all the options should have at least some sort of name that kind of indicates as to what the option is about, right? Because since I'm placing them all next to each other, there's no space for them to give them any sort of description, right? So display is just, it tells you what the option is about, but it's technically off at this moment, right? And you'll see a list of time frames here. Excuse me. Let me take a sip because I'm getting a dry mouth. So there's 2 sets of the same time, daily, 12 hour, 4 hour, 1 hour, 30 minute, 15, and 5 minute. These are kind of like what I can use myself, what I think most people tend to use. These are like the most common ones. If there's really high demand, I could potentially add other ones. So it's not that it's just completely limited to this, but for now, I think this should be more than sufficient in most cases. And again, for the sake of brevity and saving resources and all that kind of stuff, I'm trying to keep stuff relatively simple to not overload it, and for no good reason, basically. Right. So there's icons next to them. You have locks and you have arrows down. And basically what that means is we are right now on the 4 hour and we have the range active. And I want the range to display only on the 4 hour and lower. Then I would take 4 hour with the arrow down, which means if this is active, it shows perfectly fine. I go to the 1 hour, the range adapts to the 1 hour and it still shows, right? We're now seeing the rangefinder work on the 1 hour. But if I switch to the 12 hour, the overlay is technically hidden. You just don't have to hide it manually anymore. It's just automatically, because the time frame that you're on is higher than the 4, it just doesn't show anymore, right? And consequently, obviously, if you put it on 4-hour lock, then it doesn't show on the 12-hour because it's higher. It doesn't show on the 1 hour because it's lower. It only specifically shows when you're on the 4-hour, right? This is just a tiny quality of life thing that I think some of you will like, as you can do your own TA on your own timeframes and whatever else. And if you want to use the overlay for some particular reason, because it offers you some sort of signal or whatever, but you want it on a specific time frame and not annoy you on other time frames, then you can set it up in that way, right? I hope that makes sense, right? So that's all that does, and it applies to pretty much everything in the whole indicator, right? It's not just the rangefinder, it's also market structure stuff and signals and all that kind of jazz. And alerts too, I think. Yeah, probably. So just keep that in mind. Right, so that kind of covers this row. Those are the different options that you have. And we can now switch back to the rangefinder, and you see that it's here in default mode. Now this is the visual mode, remember? So we have 3 options. In default mode is just the standard mode that it always had previously in version 1 as well. And again, let me remind you, notice how kind of quickly and snappy it loads whenever I change setting, which is, I think, very cool. Right, so let's see what there is, right? We have manual, default, and extended. So default is default, which is what you see. And what you can see is, like, every time it updates a range, there's a tiny little gap there, right? See, it updates the high, and it's just a kind of tiny little gap every time there is a switch of the range, which makes it look a little bit less busy. It makes it a little bit more clear. And this is kind of like what I was initially going for in version 1. But now that the whole thing is reworked, I have a new option, which I couldn't do previously because it just wasn't physically possible for me to like code it that way. But the way it works now, it actually allows me to do this, which is extended mode, which will then extend the previous range up until the point where the new range comes in. So now it overlaps a little bit, right? And you can see it very clearly on the 50 range, right? The 50 range is now overlapping with the next 50 range, right? Now this is a little bit, if you're new to it, it can be a little bit confusing because it kind of becomes a little bit harder to tell which, 50 is part of which range and stuff. But kind of once you get used to it, then it's actually like quite nice. I'm getting used to it now myself, and I really like it. This is kind of like definitely my favorite mode right now. And here comes the kicker. Since this is rework, I can now actually build this for you guys, which is, I think Roman is going to like this very much, is manual mode. So if we turn on manual mode, what you'll see is that the range will just show one range. But now all the higher highs and lower lows have numbers with them in a sequential order, right? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? This is just the order in which they, come in as price evolves. And this number count will start depending on the drawback that you have on, right? So if it's at 500 bars, it detects it's not like 100% accurate, right? It's somewhere in this area. Oh. If we now increase this to, let's say, 800, you're going to get more bars, and this number sequence is going to shift, right? Because the first high or low that it finds is now way back to the left, right? So this now becomes 4, 5, 6, and now this is no longer, 11, 12, 13, or whatever it was. It's now 14, 15, 16, right? So keep that in mind. If you're going to use manual mode, first set this to whatever setting you want it to have before deciding which range you actually want to pick. All right, so we're back at 5. And then the second note says, when selecting a manual range, always introduce the highest number of the 2 points. So the high and the low, right? The range is made of a high and a low. So let's say you're interested in this particular range, right? Then this is the high, number 7. And it's a little bit hard to see because it's behind the wick, but this is number 8 down here, right? So if we then go into the settings and we introduce the highest of the 2, right? The one that's further to the right that came in after the other one, that's in this case number 8, we set this to number 8, and then what the range will do is it will select the exact range that you are interested in, and it now shows you the 4-hour range that you are particularly interested in, and it will stay locked in that range as long as you don't move the drawback range, basically, right? As new ranges comes in, it will just add more numbers and it will just keep going. Also, once you select the range, as you can see, the numbers disappear, so you don't longer need them, right? If you want to select a new range, you would have to first go back to 0 because the numbers only show when you're at 0, right? Yeah, just a quality of life thing for, you know, the people that want to use it. Now, one nuance to keep in mind about this is this works on this specific chart, this specific time frame with this specific drawback limit that's set. If you now switch over to, I don't know, ETH or whatever, it's obviously not going to be the same and it's going to look different, right? And it's probably going to select a range that you're maybe not interested in, right? But that's because obviously the number sequence here is completely different. So this is kind of like it's a quality of life thing that's, I think, very cool, but it's very nuanced in the sense that it probably works best if you have a separate tab with a specific chart on a specific time frame that you're just, you know, tracking very specifically and concretely, and just leave that chart, do that ticker, that time frame, and not touch it until you don't need it anymore, basically. And then you have a different tab where you're scrolling around and doing other stuff, basically, or like a second screen or whatever, right? So just keep that in mind, right? That yeah, changing this or going into multi-TimeFrame actually works. We'll show that off later. Right now it's selecting whatever range. Yeah, it's breaking down because it doesn't detect a single lower low anywhere before the number of the manual range comes in, so it kind of breaks down. You would have to increase it even further to kind of find the first lower low, and then it actually starts tracking it correctly. But yeah, you kind of get the point, right? It's a cool feature, but it's very nuanced. So for most people, just leave it on default or extend it, whichever you prefer, and then you should be pretty much good to go. Right, I'll leave it on default just to kind of leave the most clarity in terms of stuff, and not overload the screen too much, so you guys can follow, right? So in terms of the levels that are there compared to version 1, there's a little bit less because I removed the wicks, which we'll come back to in a sec, or we will cover in a sec. But basically, you still have your quarter ranges, right? So these are the 25% and the 75%. You can see them here. They're a little bit faint. I hope you can see them on the screen, but they're there. Just like before, you have your golden ratios. Right, there they are. And then you can add your targets high and your targets low individually, whichever one you prefer. Now, and a cool thing is that to get your, or this is not a cool thing, but to get your golden ratios, just one tiny note, is you need to have golden ratios on and your targets on, right? So if you're interested in this golden ratio level, then you need to have targets low and golden ratios on at the same time, because if you turn golden ratio off, then it will only display the one-to-one targets of the range itself. But for those of you with the keen eye, you already probably noticed that now this diagonal line that indicates where the range is coming from is now extended upwards and downwards, which is essentially just, you know, your one-to-one target, right? If you take a line from this point to this point and then duplicate it, it's the same distance as this from this high. I should, you know, invert the direction, but you get the idea, right? There you go. There are your one-to-ones, right? So all that's indicating is that if you follow the diagonal lines, this is the one-to-one of this range, and then this is the one-to-one of that range, right? Let me just take the arrow so I can kind of point at stuff. And then this is basically the one-to-one between this point and the mid-range, right? And equal on this side. This is the midpoint one-to-one to the midpoint of the original range where it's coming from, right? And if you now do the same trick again, you put it in manual, you put it at 8, like we did before, it's going to select that particular range again that we were interested in, and it will now show you also the targets that correspond to that particular range, and you'll see that how perfectly it hits these levels, right? Because this is actually the range that we're interested in. I think Roman is gonna really fucking love this. So yeah, I'm curious to see what you think about it. Yeah, and also I've kind of, you know, redesigned the lines a little bit. But basically what they're doing now is literally simulating what a normal FIP would look like if you use it to draw ranges, right? We just activate these, and then, wait, hold on, it's not aligned properly. There we go, right? So you can see, like, it emulates basically a FIP, if you will, right? 200% with the price, 200% with the price, 300% with the price, right? So you're 1 to 1, you're 1 to 2, 1 to 3, etc. Blah blah blah. Right? So it just looks very similar to as if you're drawing it manually with a FIP tool. One thing I mentioned in version 1, which is still true, all these ranges are always based on linear. This overlay thing does nothing on log scale, so just keep that in mind. If you're interested in log scale targets, then you're going to have to draw them manually. Okay, I think that covers the rangefinder aspect for the most part. Let me see if I forgot something. I don't think so. Right, so now we can actually just go into and show you the multi-timeframe aspect, which are most of you are probably like excited to see. Right, so we go back. We put this on default. Or let's actually put it on extended. And then we're going to turn on multi-timeframe mode. Right? So we're on the 4 hour right now, and we're going to later be switching to the 1 hour, which is a 4 bar difference, right? That makes sense. You have a 4 hour candle, which is comprised of 4 individual hourly candles, right? And what we can do now is we can activate multi-timeframe mode. And initially nothing will happen, right? If we read the tooltip, it says setting 1, the location of the status bar, and setting 2, select a high time frame overlay or a low time frame chart. So setting 1, what is the status bar? What does it mean? It says very clearly here, as I said, status bar, but as you can see, there's nothing there, it's off. Now you can locate this at the top or at the bottom. Let's put it at the top, and what you'll see appear here is just a simple indicator, the ticker that you're on, which is BTC, the time frame that you're currently on, the 4 hour, and then multi-time frame, the time frame, which in this case is inactive because we haven't actually selected one yet, right? Now, if we select, let's say, the 4 hour, let me just hide this so we have a bit more space. There we go. It says multi-time frame 4 hour, but it's still inactive. Why? Because, well, we are on the 4 hour, so there's no point in trying to like do any multi-time frame because we're on the time frame that we're supposed to be, right? But if we now go to the 12 hour, it will actually pick up the exact range that is on the 12 hour. Everything will also be a slightly bigger in terms of naming, just to like avoid stuff. But this is actually what the rangefinder looks like on the 12 hour, and I will show you in a sec by going to the 1 hour instead of the 4 hour, right? So now you can see multi-time frame is on, multi-time frame is set to the 12 hour, but we are still, the chart itself is on the 4 hour. This is just so it's easy for you to kind of at a glance keep track of where you are, because maybe you set it in the morning and you come back in the afternoon and you kind of don't remember, like, hold on, which time frame am I actually looking at? That's what it's for. If you don't need it, then you can just turn it off, right? So if we set it back to the 4 hour, it will just go back to its natural state. It will be inactive. And then if we now kind of try to take a mental note, or maybe I can just do it like this. I think this is going to be easier. So I'll just take a screenshot of this. Nope, I don't want to do that. Did it save? Let's see. I might have barked it. Yeah, I think I did. 1 sec, I'll do it again. Not with the line, please. I'll take a screenshot of this, store it there, and then let me just get this out of full screen mode so I can overlay it later, right? So 4 hour, right? Kind of try to mentally picture and remember it, because I cannot show you 2 screens at once, right? But now we're on the 1 hour, and what you can see is that it's actually drawing the exact 4 hour time frame that we were interested in. And let me see if I can, no, sorry, I'm kind of goofing this up a little bit. Give me the preview, there we go. Right, if I now overlay it, you can hopefully kind of see, right, you have this dippy here, right, that on the 4 hour is just, you know, a retest of the previous high. But if you look at the detail of the 1 hour, then it looks a little bit differently. But if you look at the marker here, then you can see kind of that, you know, it's the same thing. You can see I can actually let it go, of course. There we go. That's much better. Let's see, let's find the beginning of the range, right? So maybe that's a bit easier to kind of picture how it looks, right? So we're now currently, yeah, it's gonna hide when I do this. That's, of course, right? So we're kind of interested in this kind of area, right? Just pay attention to that. There we go, right? And you can see here, right? This is the high. This is kind of like the deviation above that high, and then we get the range low here, and yeah, you're just seeing it in more detail, basically, right? That's kind of the whole point of multi-TimeFrame, obviously. Now, obviously, you can do all this manually, and you know, have all the drawings in your folder thingy here, right? It's totally possible. But yeah, this just automates all of that, right? So you don't have to do it. And if you look at the candles itself, you can see that the ranges start in like these weird kind of places, right? They're not like perfectly aligned, but that obviously makes sense because what is now, it's literally aligning it with where the 4 hour candles open, right? And close, basically, right? That's why the line starts here and not like up here, right? Because if it was up here, then it would be the 1 hour range, not the 4 hour range, right? And if you pay attention, the blocks also look different, right? It's no longer taking this tiny block here, which is the 1 hour block. It's now actually highlighting the entire 4 hour block, right? So not only is the rangefinder in multi-TimeFrame, also this block looks weird because it starts here and there is no candle here. It just ends like here in the middle of nowhere, but that's because it's tracking. Let me just kind of try and guess which one it is. It's probably this candle here, right? But the 4 hour actually closed here. So the 4 hour body is something like this, and that's why it creates this kind of weird looking SD block, but it's accurate, right? Now it's very hard for me to show this on the video, so I just recommend if you have, you know, if you're following along or whatever, just pause the video and then check it out. You know, pull up 2 screens if you have 2 screens, or 2, you know, charts side by side, or divide the screen in 2 if you want to, and like, you know, figure it out. But like, do what I just did, and then start comparing, and you'll realize that I can't find any bugs myself anymore. I tried really hard, but I think this is pretty much accurate to a 99% in case maybe somewhere or something there's still a bug that I missed. But yeah, and so you can get a very nuanced view of like how it's interacting with this previous 4 hour range high, right? You can really see now how price evolves. It falls into that block, tries to reclaim and get out of it, fails again, and finally rejects, and then actually rejects the block and just absolutely fucking pukes, right? So yeah, it can give you a really cool, like, nice insight. And this is not the end of it. Like, this is the 4 hour. Remember what I said previously about there being a hidden multiplier to this, right? So this is now getting multiplied by 4 because we need 2,000 candles instead of 500 4 hour candles. We need 2,500 times 4 1 hour candles. You can do this all the way down to the 15 or lower, as long as, you know, PineScript allows you to do this, right? You're looking again at the exact same range, but now it's the 15 minute, right? We can go back to the beginning because it's kind of like easier to recognize. And there you go, right? Same kind of thing, right? You can see the similarity in the structure because it's literally the same structure, right? It's just on a lower time frame. We can go to the 5 minute even, probably, I think. Does it break? Not yet. And it still works. Now, one nuanced thing that I have noticed, I'm not sure if I'm, can replicate it, but there was a time where I had it like on like this, and then after a while, it just suddenly gave me an error. And I think what's happening is that if you spend like a certain amount of time on a specific like place, TradingView, just to save resources on the server side or something, just kind of unloads some of the data on the left side, and that's why it kind of triggers something and just suddenly it breaks. But you can either just switch back and forth to the chart in a different time frame, so it kind of reloads, or you can like bump it up and down one step, the drawback limit, and it should reload the thing, right? But on that topic, try not to overdo it, right? Try not to be like a fucking degen loading the daily time frame on the fucking 5 minute chart, right? Because it's an enormous amount of candles. Theoretically, it should be possible. Like theoretically, it should work, but just I don't recommend it because it's more likely that it's gonna at some point gonna break things, right? Just try to be reasonable with it, right? Anything between like, jumping from the daily to the 1 hour is fine. From the 4 hour to the 15 minute or the 5 minute is fine. Just don't go overboard with it, right? I haven't managed to actually like break it because of, actually breaking it. There's just also a certain limitation that PineScript TradingView, it just allows you to draw and, back a certain amount of candles, and just PineScript will break past that point. I've tried to put in like safety measures that if that's the case, that it just, stops there and doesn't draw, so it doesn't trigger the error, etc., etc., etc. Like I've tried my best to kind of have it so that it doesn't break, regardless what you do. But I mean, I cannot guarantee it. I haven't found any bugs in the last few weeks, but maybe they're still there. So just kind of keep that in mind, right? All right, so let's turn multi-TimeFrame off for a second and just kind of look at the other stuff. And then we can come back to it later just as a final show off, basically. One thing I forgot about the rangefinder now that I remember. So the rangefinder, like I said, the candles that become the SD blocks of the range, they are colored in. If you're running some other script that also has bar colors and this is annoying to you, in the style tab, it's the only option that you can do is actually turn these off by turning these off, right? And the candle colors will disappear, and hopefully they won't interfere with whatever other, indicator that uses bar colors that you're using. Right. Okay. So market structure break. Anybody that's familiar with market structure should already kind of know how this works, but basically what it's going to do is it's going to highlight for you where the point of break in structure was regarding what the auto rangefinder considers to be a higher low or a lower high, right? So like I explained before, if you have your downtrend, something like this, and then this high here gets lower high gets broken, then you have a market structure break. So basically what the thing is doing is it's highlighting that level as a block with the same technique that SD blocks use, right? So the lowest, the smallest of the two candles of that particular lower high is the one that will get highlighted, right? Now these come in two variants, obviously, but yeah, we would have to, let me just do this to avoid any sort of, there we go. 4 hours is probably a bit high. I can go to a lower time frame to show this off. But yeah, see the market structure break on the bullish side was all the way back here, and there hasn't been one since, in terms of the conditions that this overlay checks for, right? But yeah, you get your series of higher lows, right? And then this one gets broken by this candle here, which considers a market structure break. And then it goes to the range low, it retests the market structure break and continues lower and so on, right? If we go look at the other one, and yeah, this is your bearish one. So the line is drawn at the bottom, and the text of market structure break is also at the bottom. So you know that this is the bearish one. If you want to change the colors, then it's obviously these two colors. If you're in dark mode, it's these two colors. You can change those but the opacity is hard-coded, so just keep that in mind. And then, yeah, for the bullish one, it's kind of like the same thing, right? This is the lower high that came in, which got broken by this candle, right? And then it just leaves that block there until a new one comes in, right? Now you might note that there's another lower high here, which doesn't trigger it. And that's because this is a relatively new change that I made, and I'm still kind of like testing it myself. But what's happening is that it will only trigger the market structure break on the second higher low or lower high, right? What does it mean, right? So this is a lower low, the first higher low that comes in. This will not trigger a market structure break if price would have done this, because it's the first one after a lower low. It needs to have at least two, right? So if this one were to get broken, then it does trigger, but this one doesn't, right? I hope that makes sense. And obviously the inverse for the other side. And this is a relatively recent change, like I said, and because I noticed that the level used to jump quite a bit and sometimes not highlight the level that seemed the most relevant. And I think the solution was indeed this, because technically, yes, you have a lower low, and yes, you have a higher low, and you have a higher high. But do you actually have a trend at this point? Like, it's at the second one that you actually really confirm that, hey, you know, trend is indeed not only shifting, but it's actually trending now, right? So that's why I thought, what happens if we just ignore the first one and put it to the second one? So that's a tiny difference between version 1 and version 2. That's quite relevant, obviously. But it's also a change that I could very easily revert if it just, you know, happens to be the case that it doesn't work. But as you can see, it's where the market initially got broken remains a very important level, because you can see it gets retested here, it gets flipped here, it then retests again, fake out to the mid-range of this range, right? And then finally flips it, pushes off, and then comes back to it again when the 50% of this range lines up with the market structure break, right? So you can see like how important these lines remain throughout price action. Like these tend to be retested all the time, right? And the same kind of here in just a bit of a smaller version, right? The market structure break happens here, which I already explained before. It creates the thing, and then it rejects here, and then comes back. And let's say it puts in a low, it wipes all this liquidity down here, and then eventually creates some sort of bear flag upwards. Chances are this is a point of interest, right? You can use this as your target of retest. If it then happens to flip it, well, then you can maybe target the range higher again or something along those lines, right? So yeah, these levels are very, 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 very important. And anybody that uses market structure should already kind of know how this works. Now, I don't see them on this time frame, so let me just switch to a 15-minute one. See if I can find one here or anywhere else. Let's see. Yeah, here's one, right? So apart from these, what you also see is these faint dashed lines, which also say market structure break, right? Now, since the text is at the top, it means that it's a bullish one, right? And it's telling you basically where the next bullish market structure break comes in if price were to, you know, do something like this, right? Now, it's currently here, right, at this lower high. And this is a nice segue into, if you pay attention to this here and this here, with these kind of dotted lines that you can see here. This is actually part of SD Tech. So SD Tech no longer is just blocks. It also has added new features. And one of them is that because the range finder in Tickrate mode takes, oh, wrong one, 12 bars to complete confirmation, it takes quite a while to lock in this lower low, right? It locks in here, right? And by that time, this candle happens, right? Now, if you're, you know, a trader that's like, you know, super professional, you probably don't even need the overlay anymore because you're already like, you know, doing your thing. But it means that you kind of completely miss this move before this range even locks in, right? If you were to be interested in this move, if you just have these options on, right? We'll see later on that there's different options that might help you with, you know, finding an entry a bit sooner than that, right? So what I did is I added these as part of SD tech, which basically what they're saying is as soon as an SD block locks in, right? This block here has already locked in because it locks in on this bar here, right? This bar next then basically, or not this one because it's still inside, but then this one actually breaks the block itself and continues lower, right? But this dashed line indicates to you that, hey, it is attempting, based on SD tech, SD blocks, it's detecting that it's trying to make a higher low, which now has an X because it has failed because this bar is below this block, right? Does that make sense? On the other hand, if you look at the top, there's also one right here highlighting this block here, right? And it's telling you there's 2 bars left to lock this in as a lower high, right? So now you don't necessarily have to wait 12 bars until this happens and the range actually shifts. What you now have is on this second bar, a line like this will appear, right, telling you that, hey, there is a lower low information and it's going to take X amount of bars before it locks in, which, you know, relates to this point here. That's when it locks in, right? So SD tech is already kind of telling you ahead of time what the market structure is going to look like. And not only that, in this case, because this is a lower high, it doesn't happen. And I maybe can show you another example if I can find one. But if this happens to be, wait, I can actually probably do it with the replay tool, right? So if we go back here, we know that this lower low is going to come in, right? So this is what it looks like at the time, right? We can see the market structure break up here already, right? It's ready to trigger in case it happens, right? So I'm going to go bar by bar. We're going to see what happens, right? So here, it was hidden because you always need at least the replay to play 1 bar before it appears. So we go to the next one. That's the big candle down. We get 1 bar up that kind of like sets in the low. And then on the second bar that completes, as soon as the third one opens, it shows you the line here, right? So now you can see at this time, as soon as this candle locks and this one opens, this line appears and it tells you there's 9 bars left to lock this in as a lower low, right? That's what it's telling you. And then in this case, because this is a lower low and because the rangefinder only uses lower lows, it means that if this locks in and doesn't break this low by the time we hit 12, which is somewhere here, right? Then this range is going to shift towards this side, right? And what that means is that the mid-range is also going to shift because the high, which is here, is now no longer going to measure the mid-range from here to here. It's going to measure it from here to there, right? When the new range comes in. So there is also an indicator here which synchronizes with this one, which tells you that there's also 9 bars left to create a new mid-range, which is this one, right? So you already have a prediction as to where the mid-range is going to be when this range locks in, right? And that happens pretty much 2 candles after this low gets set, because it's based on SD tech. It's not based on the rangefinder 12 period, basically. And if we play this forward, you can kind of see what happens, right? 2, 1, there's your big chunky candle. And where does it reject? Right at the mid-range. That locks in right now, right? But the rejection has already happened, but you knew that the mid-range was going to be there, right? So that's how you can predict your targets, by using SD tech in conjunction with the rangefinder, right? I hope all that stuff makes sense. I know it's a little bit nuanced and stuff, but yeah, I think that should be hopefully clear for you guys to understand, which then kind of points out very eloquently, I would say, is the best way for you guys to learn how this thing operates and how it works is just scroll back, put on the replay tool, just way back, somewhere like, I don't know, the COVID dump or something along those lines, and giving it a replay spin. Choose your favorite time frame, your favorite chart, or whatever it happens to be, and just set the replay tool somewhere. Not at 10x speed because it's going to go way too fast, but you put it at something like, 0.5 or 1, just to kind of give you the chance to pause when you find something interesting, take some notes, so on and so on. But just do this over and over again, right? Because basically how I learned to use this is in a similar fashion, that just let it run and let it do its thing, and keeping track of price while it does its thing, right? And you can just kind of see how it updates as stuff goes, right? And I'm checking the recording, 1 hour 15 minutes already. Fuck me. So much for having a shorter video. Oh well. Anyway, like, you kind of get the idea, right? This is basically how I recommend. Just, when you're having lunch or whatever you're doing, or, just watch this go and observe it over and over and over again. And you'll kind of start to see the pattern as to what it's constantly doing, right? One thing I noticed plenty of times in the previous videos, like the mid-range is very, very important. It creates such a, right, a new range gets created, mid-range is the point where it launches off again, right? First dump candle straight into the mid-range, goes to the other side, rejects the market structure break, right? And you saw on the low time frame, it found the mid-range again as it found the new low, basically, right? And like I said, this follows rules. This is non-subjective. This is the same thing. It happens on stock, like stocks, crypto, you name it. It doesn't fucking matter. Any chart, any time frame, you can go as low as the fucking 15 seconds, if you will, or like 5 seconds. Let's just throw on the 5 second for a laugh. Let this thing load. And just, right, it just loads the range instantly. And it's the same thing, right? The same pattern. Like, if you can, right, it finds a low, it rejects the mid-range, it then flips the new mid-range, and then off it goes, right? Where does it stop? Look, mid-range of the bigger dump, right? It retraces back, deviation of the new mid-range, right? It just happens over and over and over and over all the time, right? And yeah, if you want to learn this thing, you can either use the replay tool or just go to a very low time frame, because everything is just fractal. It's just the same thing over and over again. And you'll just very quickly learn how this overlay highlights horizontal ranges, market structure, and all the other jazz, right? Now, I don't recommend trading the 5 seconds. It's not something I do myself, but it is there. If you so desire, you can throw this thing on the lowest time frame and it will operate in the exact same way as it operates on the 4 hour, the daily, or whatever it happens to be, right? And then mix in multi-TimeFrame if you really want to go like ham at it. Another tiny tip, technically you can run 2 of these at the same time. Put one on, lock it to the 4 hour or whatever, go down to your lower time frame, put the 4 hour on the multi-TimeFrame mode so you can track it, and then add a second overlay with like a lower opacity or whatever, and like configure it in a way that like makes visual sense to you, and then you can have 2 of them running at the same time, one tracking the higher time frame, the 4 hour, and one tracking the 1 hour, locally the 1 hour structure. So you have the 1 hour structure and the 4 hour structure. Crazy. To me, it's, it depends, because it kind of becomes very busy on your chart. So yeah, it really depends on your style, what you want to do, and blah, blah, blah. All right, so let's move on, because the video is already getting quite long. There's not too much left, I think. This is pretty much covered. That's covered. Yeah, multi-TimeFrame. We'll come back to that once I show this, right? So let's market structure trend zones. This is completely new. This was not available in the previous version. Wait, before I do that, before I forget, let's go back to the 15 minutes. Right. Remember these things, the kind of like prediction of what's coming up in terms of range, market structure, and that stuff. There's a second toggle here next to SD Tech, right? And it in the settings it says SD Tech toggle 2, SD lock and wick values. And what does it mean? If you activate this alongside this, you now have also SD lock. So this is this level here, right? This is where this SD block locks in, right? 1, 2 bars, right? So this is where it locks. And then we have the wick, which is this level here, right? And this is just a tiny help for if you're trying to place an order or buy or sell order or whatever, right? Because as you'll see in a moment, there's going to be SFP and deviation signals that are going to be triggered on this bar. So if you use one of those, whatever, you get a signal, hey, boom, an SFP locked in on this time frame, you know, whatever. And then this is pretty much where price is going to be at. So you can easily enter your order in, you know, whichever exchange that you're using. You have the values right there. So you don't have to manually look them up like, you know, where's this wick at? Where do I need to put my stop, right? You kind of have the value. And now I wouldn't use the exact value, obviously, like give it a bit of a, you know, a boost. So it's not like right on the fucking wick. But yeah, this is just a quality of life thing. And pay very close attention to what I'm saying right now. This is not a trading strategy. This is just for convenience if you want to use it, but this is not like whenever this appears, you should, you know, go long or go short. This is nothing to do with that. This is just to highlight these two levels for convenience, nothing else, right? So don't come to me like, hey, I traded this signal, because it's not a signal, right? Don't do that. Figure out your system, figure out your strategy, whatever it is. And if this is helpful to you, then you can use it, but don't treat it as any sort of signal by itself. That's not what it's supposed to do. All right, that's very important. So now with that out of the way, let's go back to the 4 hour because it's just a bit cleaner. We can turn off the market structure breaks because we don't need those anymore. And we're going to turn on the trend zones. Trend zones are very simple to understand. It's nothing fancy, but it's cool nonetheless, in my opinion. Let me take another sip of water because I'm running dry. Man, so much for small, shorter videos. It's going to be longer than the original version one. Okay, what is this doing? This is highlighting the background whenever price is is entering or basically closing inside the SD block of the rangefinder, right? So now that the price is entering in this and closing inside, it triggers red, and it will also trigger red when it's just completely outside of the range, right? So as soon as it enters, it triggers and then keeps triggering if it just keeps being either inside the block or outside the range completely, right? Same for the inverse, right? For the bullish side, it's the same thing, just in the opposite direction. And as you can see, this is just a very easy, simple visual reminder that when this price action is happening, is like, hey, we are in a range. We are trading at the range low. Chances are that if this holds, we're going to go back to the range high, right? Remember the dynamic of your typical horizontal range. It's sideways until it, you know, does break out consistently out of one of the sides, right? And as you can see here, it basically like closes inside, closes outside, closes inside, closes outside, right? And that's when you get this kind of like spotty kind of pattern, right? But this is a signal in itself, right? What this is visually telling you is that it's trying to, you know, break out of this range, and it's failing every single time, over and over again, right? And there's going to be, the alerts are going to be obviously working to like give you alerts when this happens, right? There's going to be an alert once I, you know, finish it, that's going to tell you, hey, it's entering the range high, and then it says it's exiting the range high, and it's entering and it's exiting, and it's entering and it's exiting. And then you're going to be like, what the fuck is happening, right? And there's going to be an option to kind of tone that down, so it only triggers once every 12 bars or something like that, so you don't get spammed. But yeah, kind of that's the idea behind it, right? And basically what it's going to do for you is it's going to give you two types of signals, right? It's going to give you the brief spotty kind of signal like this, right? Where it's like pip pop, and that's a deviation, right? It's a deviation of this low, basically, or an attempt to break out of the range here, or an attempt to, like, you know, whatever. That's one signal, kind of like a short kind of signal. And then the opposite of that is obviously when you get big like swaths like this is where We have a 4-hour retest of the 50. It then breaks out of the range with this kind of scam wick, but then it actually holds the range and it never actually drops below this tiny little supply block of the previous range higher high, right? And therefore the color never interrupts and the color just keeps going, right? So when this is happening, this is kind of visually telling you like it's holding above this range high. If it holds, it's likely that it's going to go into, you know, price discovery or whatever. And that's exactly what we see, right? And it stays blue in this case, my bullish color, all the way until the new range comes in, right? The new range high comes in. Now price is trading underneath this block when this locks. And punk, you exit the bullish trend, if you will, right? That's why they're called trend zones, right? Because it's telling you that during this entire time it's trending. So, I mean, here it's obviously like you wouldn't sell necessarily here because it's like such a strong uptrend, but in different scenarios, like for example here, right? As long as this is blue or your bullish color, there's not necessarily an immediate threat, if you will. Right? And then when it exits, it kind of starts moving down, right? It's telling you that, yeah, it's struggling to break out. It's probably gonna like slow down a bit, go sideways, whatever. If it's spotty, it's a bit more dangerous, right? Because it really tells you that it's really struggling to maintain price inside this tiny block, basically, right? So that's kind of what it means. And yeah, just like I said, I recommend just kind of like turning it on, do a replay run, and just kind of see how it behaves. The beauty about this thing is that it actually triggers on the bar itself, right? There's no confirmation period or anything. It just tracks the literal bar that it happens, right? So as this bar is in real time in progress, if it's like doing this, it will like, you know, flashlight like blip, 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 blip until it locks and then decides if it's inside or outside, right? But then the next bar immediately goes outside. It's like a bullish signal. It's rejecting this lower low block and off it goes. Where does it go? The 50% range of the initial drop. Right, you kind of gonna start to see the pattern, hopefully. Right, so now this brings me back to remember multi-TimeFrame mode. Let's turn it on and go to the 1 hour. Now the colors are still the same, right? Generally speaking, the way it's highlighting, for example, remember this low that I was pointing out? This one still looks the same. This one looks more spotty though, right? But why is that? It's because there's more candles now, right? There's more candles, but the range is still the same because it's still detecting the higher highs, lower lows based on the 4 hour because multi-time frame is on the 4 hour, right? So what was like a very spotty kind of 3 thing on the 4 hour suddenly becomes a much more nuanced 1 hour like rejection, 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 right? So you can kind of use this as a sort of premonition kind of system to, you know, set the alerts for this thing on the 1 hour while you have multi-time frame on the 4 hour configured, so you get the alerts on the 1 hour instead of the 4 hour. You see kind of like where I'm going with this? Play around with it, see what you like. Just keep in mind that the lower time frame you go, the more noisy the signal is gonna get, obviously, right? If you do this on the 5 minute, then on the 5 minute you get like, I don't know, fucking 10 alerts in a row, right? And can get annoying. But the option is there if you wanna like use that feature, right? So just keep that in mind. And yeah, if you have questions about that, just come to the Discord and I will like explain how that stuff works, because this can get quite, you know, nuanced and complicated, I guess. Oh, did I? Come on, stop giving me the thing. There we go. Right, and then I guess the last feature, yes, hopefully. 1.5 hours, almost done. Okay, so the last option that I'm gonna cover is SD Tech, which is the last thing also that I built that took me a long ass time to get right. So remember, setting 1 is the block length, setting 2 is the mode in which it's set, which is what we're gonna discover now. And then note at the bottom says all market structure and SD Tech elements will adjust accordingly when multi-time frame mode is active. You already kind of saw that. And then note SFP plus is experimental. In addition to normal SFP mode, it adds SFP detection to the previous higher high and lower low. So let's just go into SFP mode and see what it does. Right. Boom, there we go, right? So now suddenly we have like deviation, SFP, SFP, and they're like gray and they have like icons and all kinds of jazz, right? So let me just explain what this all means. Basically, there is 3 types, right? And that is why, you pay attention, there is 3 stars at the top of each deviation, or 1 in this case, right? So you can think of them as 3 types, 3 levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, right? So let's just kind of go over what this thing in particular means, right? So there's 3 types. It can be either an SFP or a deviation, right? That's the middle part, the text that you can see. What does it mean? Well, the way I interpreted it, and the most people, as far as I know, is an SFP swing failure pattern is a wick high, like this one, right? And you can also see that it's drawing a line as to where it's detecting the SFP from, right? A candle comes through, creates a high that's higher than this wick, but then the candle actually closes below, right? So the wick creates the break of this high, basically, right? But the candle closes below, so that's a break with a wick, not with the candle itself, if that makes sense, right? That's what I consider an SFP. If we look at the deviation here in the corner, right, it's different, right? Let me just scroll to the side a little bit, right? We're taking this wick high here of this previous higher high, right? It gets broken with this candle up, right? And then the next candle closes right back down below it again, right? That's a deviation, right? It's the same thing, essentially, like it's just a swing failure pattern, if you will, or a fake out, or, you know, deviation, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like the same thing. I just use these two different names to distinguish between it either being a wick or a candle that does the pattern, basically, right? And then, oh, come on, stop it. There we go. Below it, we have these little things, right? These little triangles, right? What does the triangle mean? The triangle simply means that there is an engulfing characteristic to this particular SFP, right? Some, like this one, doesn't have it. Others do. This one also doesn't have it, but this one does, right? And that's because the candle that puts the high, it gets completely engulfed by the other candle. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what specifically technically counts as a, you know, engulfing characteristics. Mainly what you should kind of keep in mind is that anything between, let's say, 4 bars, it should pretty much pick up as a engulfing characteristic, as long as if you have, let's say, you have 2 candles up and then 2 candles down, right? The second candle, the one that locks in the SD block, right? Because these are all based on SD blocks. If there's no SD block, like here, for example, there's nothing here, right? No block thingy is appearing here. There is an SFP here, right? But it doesn't detect it because there's no SD block there, right? So it just ignores it, right? So if the second candle closes lower than the candle before the high was created, then it's is considered engulfing, right? Again, I'm not going to go into the whole nitty-gritty of it, but that's more or less how you should count them, right? So that's what this means, right? So it's giving you basically 3 signals, because I will cover the stars, what I mean right now. So you have an SFP with a wick, not with a bar. It has an engulfing characteristic, and then the stars, the 3 types are as follows. So type 1 is it's an SFP or deviation of a local SD block, right? Let me see if there's one on screen. I don't see one, but yeah, well, I'll show them off in a sec then. It's an SFP or a deviation of a higher low or a lower high. These are not very common. They don't tend to happen very often, just because of the nature where these highs and lower highs and higher lows are located. Because yeah, that's it happens, but they're not quite as common as the other ones. And then level 3, which is the max level, which is like the ones that are very, very important, is obviously the SFP or deviation of a higher high or a lower low, which means that it's a deviation of the range, right? Because if you're in a range, then if you SFP the range high, then it's highly likely that, you know, you're gonna see some sort of a reaction through that, right? You can see here that, for example, this break here takes way too long, right? That's why it doesn't get detected. Oh, deleting the text here. Let's remove this. There we go. Is there anything else left that I left behind? No, there's not. All right, so let's kind of go over some examples, and then I'll cut the video there, because this is pretty much the last, right? So we have a higher high come in. There is a new higher high with an SD block, obviously, because otherwise there's no range there. It then highlights for you the level of the wick that gets SFP'd, basically, right? And there, and it tells you, right? It tells you it's a SFP, 3 stars of an higher high. That's also why it's colored darker than the other ones, right? It tells you that it's an SFP with a wick, not with a candle, and it tells you that it has, in this case, also engulfing characteristic, right? And remember, SD blocks, they lock in with 2 bars, so this signal comes in. This is the high on the second candle, so this white one here, right? This is where this signal appears. Basically, when that candle locks, boom, there you get it, right? And then you still have ample time to get into a position, however you trade this, to catch the move down, right? Now, obviously, on the lower time frames, especially, there are scenarios where this happens, and before the second candle can even close, like, price is already down here, right? Then yeah, you're gonna sometimes, if you're relying on this signal, you know, you're not gonna catch all of them, but it's also not meant for you to like catch all of them, right? This is just the reason I built this is mainly for myself, in the sense that I can see them after the fact very clearly, and then I'm like, fuck, why didn't I take this trade? Like, it's so fucking obvious. There's an SFP, deviations, engulfing, like, why the fuck didn't I take this? And then it's just because I wasn't paying attention to it. I was making dinner or whatever the fuck, and I just, you know, missed it. I wasn't at my desk, whatever it happens to be. So yeah, that's kind of like why I built this. But yeah, the consequence of this is that it kind of clears up a lot of the noise when you normally try to code SFPs or that kind of stuff, because they are locked to only happening when SD block tech happens, right? These things here. It just filters out a lot of the noise. And the only kind of drawback, nuance, compromise that we have to make for that is that they don't lock on one bar, they actually lock on the second bar. That's the only difference, right? And it cleans up a lot of the noise, basically, right? So here, for example, we have 1 star deviation. What does it mean? Well, 1 star means it's a local deviation of the previous SD block, right? It's kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in, and we can actually kind of tell. It's very hard to tell because the line is kind of lining up with the block, but there's the dotted line right here at this wick, right? And if we draw this line through, you see that this deviation is indeed a candle that closes above this wick of this previous SD block, and then the next one immediately closes below again, right? But the second candle is not lower than this one, so it's not engulfing. See what how this works? And I remember there was one here, right? So here we have, again, a lower high, which is this one, right? With this SD block. The wick of that lower high is here. It doesn't track this one because it happens way too far back. So it tracks this level here. And then you can see that this candle indeed has a wick that's slightly above, but then closes below, which is an SFP, not a deviation. It has 2 stars telling you that it's coming from this lower high. And yeah, it creates a bit of a reaction, right? And this is the candle that puts in the high. This is candle number 1. This is candle number 2. So this signal appears here when this locks in and this bar opens, basically, right? So in this case, you would have to be quite fast, right? You have to, like, you know, try to catch it right as the signal happens if you want to, you know, if your system tells you to trade this particular setup. with some other confluence factors that you are taking into account. And then, yeah, so it kind of varies, you know, in terms of, you know, confirmation period and stuff. Like some signals will appear quite okay, like this one. Others will appear a little bit late because just the move happens so fast that you barely have any time, right? And if you're somebody that's good at catching those moves, then well, then you probably don't even need the overlay because you're already a master trader anyway. So, right, this is just a tool to help you, and especially if you're kind of new to market structure, ranges, and that kind of stuff. It can really help you kind of learn the dynamics of these things. Yeah, here we have just a tiny triangle thingy, just telling you like, hey, see, there's a low came in, it has an SD block, right? And then the second candle, which is after the low comes in, which is this one here, right, closes higher than the candle previous to this low candle, which would be either this one or this one. I'm not completely sure, but yeah, there's, you know, some complicated logic behind under the hood, behind the scenes, that kind of keeps track of all that stuff. And yeah, that's why this is an engulfing characteristic, but there's no sort of SFP, because the SFP would be like down here, right? It doesn't wipe this level, so there's no SFP. Now, I'm telling you, the system is not perfect, but it's fucking damn close. Like, I really like it a lot. It took me weeks to get this right, and lots of sleepless nights, and yeah, really take it for a spin, and you'll kind of see for yourself. Like, I'm quite amazed at like how good this performs. Actually, I'm very, very, very proud of it. So yeah, I hope you guys will like it too. All right, I'm gonna cut it there because it's already 1 hour 40 minutes. Oh my god. Right, let me just double check if I forgot it. Yeah. So in the info tool, it says this. Note at the bottom, SFP plus is experimental, right? So let me just see if I can find one for you guys. You can have both SD and SFP on at the same time, and there's also the last option, which is SFP plus. Let me see, there was one that I saw somewhere. Yeah, it's this one actually, right? Right. So let me just kind of zoom in and show you the difference, right? If I turn this off back to SFP normal, you'll see this change. Right, there we go. See, it's an SFP level 1. So that means of the local SD block, the previous one that came before it, it's this wick here. I don't know why the block is not painting. It should be painting, but anyway. Yeah, and it's an SFP, right? The wick below and then continues higher, right? But if you turn on SFP plus, it will actually turn it into a level 3 deviation with engulfing character, and it has a tiny little plus on top of the 3 stars. And what does it mean? If we read this, remember, it says adds detection to the previous higher high and lower low. So now it's not only tracking if this is the last lower low, right? Because this signal is confirmed on this candle here, right? The second candle after the low comes in. So this signal triggers here. It's now not only tracking this previous lower low where the range is at, it's also tracking this one here. Right? And you can see that in this case, it does indeed pick up this wick, not this one, because it's drawing the line from here, right? So there's a little bit of margin here. Like, it can detect wicks a few candles back, but not like all the way. So it's tracking this wick here, which is like all the way over here. And now you can actually see that, yes, indeed, this candle closes below that wick, and then the next one immediately closes back above this wick. That's why it's now a deviation, because it's no longer, this overrules, because it's like a higher importance than the local one, that's SFP, that's here, right? Which is this one, right? I hope that makes sense. But yeah, it's something that I just added to kind of test myself, see how reliable it is, and so on. And yeah, it's gonna take a little bit of time, and all the guys that are going to be playing with this thing maybe in the coming month, February, just, you know, want to help me out and track this kind of stuff, and we can kind of maybe figure out some sort of percentages to how effective this actually is or not, right? So that's basically what SFP plus means. And yeah, we'll see if that keeps being a feature or not. That's why it's experimental. Yeah, the alerts, I won't cover them here because they're not working. I will make a separate video once the overlay goes out of beta, And I will cover the alerts specifically because this is kind of like, you know, placeholder, temporary kind of thing. Yeah. All right, man, I think that pretty much covers everything. I think so. Let me just check my notes. We did that, we did that. Bum, 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 bum. Am I forgetting something? Not really. Trends. Yeah, we talked about the importance of the 50%. Confluence with oscillators. I haven't mentioned. Like, yeah, you watch these signals when, like, you know, because I can already tell there's RSI divergence here, right? So combine this stuff with, you know, your typical. If you're a profits suite trader, then, you know, your golden pepes and all that kind of jazz. Just, you know, combine as much stuff as you possibly can, I guess, and create more confluence between this thing and then other stuff. What else? Yeah, I mentioned that you can run 2 or more overlays at the same time, right? With different settings. And yeah, so in the future, I will finish with this. I'm gonna take a little breaky from coding for a tiny bit, maybe focus on the Discord server and get it like fleshed out during this month that the overlay 2.0 beta is free. And then, yeah, kind of the ideas, I learned quite a bunch of stuff building this, like advanced trickery and magic, and I will have some ideas to improve the quantizer, the oscillator, right? So that will probably be my my next goal, to update this thing and make it a bit more interesting. Also adapt the settings panel so it looks like, you know, similar to the new version, basically. Kind of clean everything up and make it run smoothly like the new 2.0 overlay, right? So, but yeah, that's gonna take me, you know, a couple of months again to, you know, because I'm a one-man army on this side. So yeah, I'll just, you know, take my time and hopefully come up with cool stuff for the oscillator in the coming future. Right, I think that pretty much covers it. I'm gonna cut it here because the video is getting way too long. And hopefully the neighbor with his drill didn't fuck up my recording. Let's see, where is my OBS? There we go. Right, guys, I'm signing off. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you were able to kind of follow along with the overlay. And remember, go to the previous video, click the link to get this one, and then once you have this in your favorites, there's a link here to my Discord, and then you can, it's free for everybody to enter during this month of February. And yeah, go get your hands on it and play around with it and tell me what you think. And I'm very interested to hear your feedback and see you in the Discord. And, you know, like I said, any questions, don't be shy, just come on over and ask me whatever you want to do. And as a last note, I am gonna be probably doing a live stream with all you guys that want to tune in to just kind of do this, but live, and just, you know, talk in the moment, and you guys can ask me questions and ask me to show you stuff on the fly, basically. Just have a bit more of a live interaction than just these recorded videos. All right, that's it, guys. I'm gonna stop here and wish you good luck, and looking forward to see you guys sharing charts with my my little baby on it. So yeah, signing off, guys. Have a good one. Ciao.